what kind of responsibility are we assigning to this person? Are we giving this person challenging projects, or do we kind of take a step back and help them get more into maintenance mode so that they have more capacity for their personal life and all the stuff that is going on there? And then there's always other team members that are like, I'm bored in my personal life. I'm really looking forward to just diving into work. I want new challenges. I want to grow. Give me something to sink my teeth into. And you want to have these conversations because ultimately humans are not robots.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenley, and welcome back to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today we've got a great Tactical Tuesday episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space, while other days we cover things like trending topics. Stop by every Tuesday like today for a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that's going to help you drive better results in your day-to-day. Some days we open up for Q&A, but other days you get a mic drop episode from Matt where he shares something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. All right, today's Tactical Tuesday. Another segment in our internal interview series. And so today's interview is going to be the performance review. So I don't think this one needs much further explanation. So we'll jump right into it with our famed co-host, Vivien. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me again. Let's jump into it.
Oh yeah. So performance reviews, as we say, I think everyone kind of knows what these are and the purpose of them, but I know we all have been in. Everyone runs their own flavor of it, different styles. So some are good, some could use some coaching and help. And so as a recruiter, this is a huge opportunity for you, whether you're in-house or not, to be able to help inject like some best practices, share thoughts, add value in this line of thought. So I know you've come across this a good bit, so I'd love to hear your thoughts here.
Let's jump into it. I think the big philosophy behind it is COVID really changed how we view work, especially everybody started working from home. And now there's some that are returning back into the office. They're figuring out they really want to be in the office. Others are like, never again am I going into a car to go through a commute. And that kind of changed how people view work, but also how like they integrate work and life together and how it meshes together. So performance reviews traditionally used to be, what are you doing with work? How are you doing with work? And completely ignoring the personal aspect, which you really can't. I know that everybody's supposed to compartmentalize work in their personal lives and not take the other into the other space. But the reality is that when something is going on in your personal life, it will change your performance at work and vice versa. So performance reviews shouldn't just be about how are you doing physically here at work in terms of performance and all that kind of stuff, but what else is going on that we probably should keep in mind for your job. And I think in general, the consensus has been that people who are being reviewed find this very uncomfortable and dread these conversations, as opposed to like managers are like, oh, I have to prep all of this and like kind of show all of the data and all of that kind of stuff. And so there's a different way to kind of do this. And I think that's what we want to chat through today.
Yeah. How do we make it so they're just more enjoyable for everyone? So, all right, how would you usually kick these off?
I would just start by like connecting on a more personal level, saying, hey, how are you? Whenever somebody like asks, hey, how are you? Say something that is a little bit more personal. It doesn't have to be personal, but for example, like if like I have a cat that is like running around and meowing, wanting my attention or something like that, I say, hey, if you hear random meows, my cat is really wanting attention right now. Completely ignore him. He's totally fine. And that way you're breaking the ice a little bit so that it's not like this like scary, gloomy thing. And the person recognizes, okay, this is a person that has something going on. They have their own quirks and stuff going on. This is not like this ice cold villain out to get me. And so you want to break that ice a little bit. And that's always kind of like fun to do anyways. And then start by just kind of also saying, hey, I know that like a lot has been going on. I just want to set kind of the stage of like what we're going to be talking about today and just breeze through the agenda. And that's about it.
Okay. So yeah, I like that because it gets past the I'm good, how about you? It's like that's everyone's default answer, right? Like
you can connect on that. That's like, hey, how are you? Good. How are you? Okay, let's get started. But if it's like, yeah, I've just been really busy packing for my London trip. It's like, oh my gosh, that's so fun. You know, what's been going on? Tell me more about that. And you spend like 5 minutes like talking about that and you make a little bit more of like a personal connection. And that's also super important. We're not robots.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes it, as you do get into the agenda, it reminds you to keep it all we're all human at the end of the day. So this agenda that you were talking to, it sounds like you've got a couple different bullets, items, topics that you like to cover as part of all these. So what are some of these items?
The first one would be review of achievements. You want to see what is the proudest accomplishment by the employee. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that made a huge impact on the business, although that is also super important. That's your job as a manager to see what were some of the accomplishments that we noticed made a positive impact on the business. But you also kind of want to see what is the accomplishment that the employee is really proud of personally because they worked really hard on this project. And although it's just a tiny piece of the puzzle, it's the tiny little details that ultimately end up making things fall apart. Or not. If you take, for example, airplanes, if one very, very crucial screw is missing, that's really, really bad. And so details really do matter. The small things really do matter. One screw in the grand scheme of things with an airplane, not that big of a deal because they have like thousands on them. But if it's that one really crucial one, that can lead to a disaster. So you don't just want to look at, okay, what made the biggest difference overall, but what are some of the smaller details that they're also paying attention to that are keeping things glued together. Mm-hmm. And so that is one of them. And
so on that, I want to stop real quick. Because obviously as the reviewer, you know what you want to cover ahead of time. You're thinking about this, or you should be thinking about this and preparing answers for yourselves. Are you sharing these items with the reviewee ahead of time and saying, I'm going to touch on things that, you've achieved, things that we want to get into? Are you having them prepare thoughts? Because I know some people, if they're put on the spot, they won't have a good, I know I won't have a good answer for that. I need to sit back and think for 5 minutes about like, what am I really proud about for this quarter? So, I guess how much of this are you usually sharing ahead of time?
I think it makes sense to at least outline the agenda to say, hey, these are the questions that I kind of want to go over. And these are a couple of things that I picked up on. And this is where it depends on the relationship that you have, because if you already have a strained relationship, they're going to be dreading that. And if you're giving them an assignment of like, well, like you feel like you haven't been really doing well, and then they're asking you, what is your biggest accomplishment? And you're like, I don't feel like I have one. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. And so the relationship leading up to the performance review is also super important. And it's not just like, let's jump into this almost like a cold plunge with no heads up, no warning, no kind of relationship prior to that. Mm-hmm. So sharing it does make sense, and it makes sense to kind of just give them a heads up so that they're prepared. I think it's very similar to giving candidates the hiring manager LinkedIn profile prior to the interview, because to me, in my opinion, it makes sense so that the candidate that is going in for an interview is aware of who the hiring manager is. The hiring manager has their full resume, has the cliff notes from the recruiter. It's not a balanced scale of powers. And so I think anything to kind of like stabilize that is going to create a little bit more trust. And even if somebody is a little bit apprehensive after their first really good experience with you on the performance review, that's going to change the game moving forward. You got to keep in mind that people are leaving their jobs because of the manager absolutely sucks. That is like the number one reason. And so odds are they haven't had a really good experience. Odds are they haven't had a really good manager. Keep that in mind when you're kind of going into these as a manager.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, next item on the agenda.
Assessments of goals. And so this is something for when you've had a performance review before. You want to touch on, hey, these are the goals that we set last time. And like you kind of mentioned, it makes sense to send that ahead of time and say like, hey, remember, these are the goals that we set last time. I would love to chat with you on like what happened with those goals. Not necessarily to say like you didn't meet them, because business needs change sometimes where you have to divert resources. So the original goal that was set at the time may have been completely deprioritized. So it makes sense to kind of like go over this and figure out, does this goal still make sense? Do you want to keep this one? Is it worth revisiting? What happened to it? And just kind of having that dialogue, and also kind of chatting through what were some unexpected challenges that kind of helped or hindered you in that particular goal, or some curveballs that you have experienced. That's always something that you need to cover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important one. I like it. Okay, next up.
This one I actually got from you, work-life balance. This is something that rumor has it that you actually do during your, like, I think quarterly meetings or something like that, where you touch on work-life balance. What are their personal goals? How can you help them? And this also helps you kind of figure out, okay, what's going on in their life? Like, do they have like a growing family? Are they getting ready to move? This is going to require a lot more resources. So maybe work-wise, that person needs to take a little step back. That's not to say that they're not performing anymore, that it's an excuse to not perform as well anymore, but more so of like, what kind of responsibility are we assigning to this person? Are we giving this person challenging projects? Or do we kind of take a step back and help them get more into maintenance mode so that they have more capacity for their personal life and all the stuff that is going on there? And then there's always other team members that are like, I'm bored in my personal life. I'm really looking forward to just diving into work. I want new challenges. I want to grow. I want like throw new challenges at me. I am bored. My personal life is like coasting, breezing. It's perfect. Give me something to sink my teeth into. And you want to have these conversations because ultimately humans are not robots. We're not machines. Our performance is not always going to be consistent. It's a little bit more like a roller coaster, and it largely is affected by what's going on in our personal lives. And having these kinds of conversations to figure out what's going on, this is also going to kind of help your team recover after they've made like a big challenging push and kind of divert some resources into their personal life while they go more into like maintenance mode and vice versa. And so that's something that you want to cover as well.
Yeah, they can be, when you know how to pair them well, it's a force multiplier. You know how to get the most out of them in work and their personal life and everything. So being attuned to that is very important. And also for the people who are constantly driven and seeking goals, they will resent work if you are holding them back from their personal goals as well. So you need to be aware of that. If they do have ambitious goals for health, family, anything else, and you aren't giving them the time to do that, you're digging your own grave with that employee. I can tell you the timeline started if you're keeping them from those.
Oh, 1000%. I placed one candidate who, one of the reasons why he left is because he didn't have any personal time, like, and nothing. He wanted to get back into marathons and triathlons. That requires quite the commitment. And he wanted to spend more time with his family. And he took a 6-figure pay cut just to be able to have more free time. And so in general, people are always saying people are only going to move if they're getting more money. That's not necessarily true. Money is just one of the many factors that affect why people are changing their work situations. And sometimes they're more than happy to take a pay cut because there is a point in time where people do recognize that money isn't everything, that there are some things that are a little bit more important. Obviously, you have to be at a certain financial level to have that kind of like consideration and thought process. But money is not everything. Work is not everything. Personal life is not everything. Everything has to be integrated together, and you have to look at it in like a wholesome 360 view. Otherwise, you're missing out and ignoring parts that are interconnected that have an influence on each other. And this is where that's a huge risk.
Yeah, I'm fully with you. And I think that feeds in well to this next one, which is like, how do you get to like areas of improvement for both individuals, open the dialogue for feedback?
Yeah. So you want to start off by acknowledging like you've done really well. Because even if somebody has a bad performance review where they didn't meet the KPIs that you thought about, there's a reason why. And you want to dive into that and figure out, okay, well, clearly there was some kind of mismatch. What is going on? How can we help you actually succeed? As opposed to like, I know that like PIPs are popular, but it's more so of like, I'm putting you on a performance improvement plan because you absolutely suck. And most of the time people don't consider what else is actually influencing that. And so you want to have this conversation to figure out where can we help you achieve a little bit better. Maybe did we set goals that were too ambitious, were unrealistic, and we didn't realize it until just now? That happens too. That's perfectly normal. And just being able to admit that is huge as well. And it builds trust, which is so crucial for these to actually be effective. Without trust, they're not going to tell you anything. It's just going to be crickets and pulling teeth. And that makes no sense either.
Yeah. A PIP should never come as a surprise. Like a PIP should never come as a surprise, right? You should be having this conversation already with the team members. So they should know, like, you've already spoken about, hey, I need you to improve here. Everything else, give time. You should be coaching them. So if it does come to that point, they're aware. You'll all have had this conversation.
Yeah, pretty much. And you also want to get their feedback on like, okay, obviously something happened. There's some areas of improvement. What do you think would actually help you improve in these particular areas? What resources do you need? What kind of assistance do you need? Do you need a little bit more guidance? Are things too ambiguous? All of these things can happen, and you want to give a couple of examples as opposed to just, you want this to be an open-ended question, such as like, what are some things that you think would help you improve in these particular particular areas, but suggest a couple of things, because sometimes people are not quite aware of what exactly is hindering them. So I remember one of the popular questions that interviewers like to ask is, what's a weakness of yours? And a smart way that I learned to answer that is to really take a genuine weakness and also figure out what's causing that weakness and how you were working on addressing it. So for me, the one that I struggle with sometimes is procrastination. And a lot of times I only procrastinate is because I don't have the information that I need to actually take action on it. And if I don't know where to find it, then this is where that like happens, and it turns into this big snowball, right? And so just kind of knowing these things and throwing something out. And as a manager, self-awareness and kind of understanding and rising through the ranks, you understand the different kind of aspects that can influence performance. And throwing some things out there like that can be super helpful to actually gain some insight, because you want to get actionable input from the person, as opposed to just, I think I just need more help. Help with what? Like try to dig a little bit deeper and ask follow-up questions to really get to something that is really actionable, that you can put almost like into writing as an action plan, so that they feel empowered of like, I know exactly what to do. I know exactly what my expectations are. I know what the next steps are. I know what the resources are that are available to me. I know how to access them. All of these different things are really important, because if they don't have these pieces of information, then they can't really be successful. Like you can have a conversation about, oh, these things would improve my performance, but if there's no actionable piece in it, then nothing's going to happen. You're just going to have the same conversation every time you have these.
Exactly. It's kind of fluffy. So yeah, that's a good one. All right. Following that part of the conversation, what do you get into?
Setting goals. And that kind of goes into, okay, areas of improvement. And that kind of then ties into goals, because obviously there's going to be some areas where they have fallen short. And depending on that, it might make sense to say, okay, we're actually going to transfer that to a different team member that absolutely loves these things, versus we're going to give you more responsibilities in that particular area because you're really good at it, you enjoy it, you want to continue moving into that direction. And so the goals aspect is also figuring out, okay, what is the actual action plan? So we have this goal, and now we have the steps and the breakdowns of how we can help you achieve that particular goal. And part of that is also going to be, okay, do we need some checkpoints to make sure that you're on track and kind of check in? Maybe there's some resources that you need, things like that. Maybe some, like the project has changed, priorities have changed, all of these different things. And so part of the goal setting should also be like the stepping stones and milestones to reaching those.
Yeah, I like that. One thing that I got in a former job that I really appreciated was, so we hired individuals, and then we had multiple people in the same type of role. So we could create templates. Like you're always going to have these types of goals. You need these skills, these expertise sets. And what we did is we said, when you come in, we understand people are going to come in across the spectrum of experience and everything else. But for you personally, we're going to put you, we had 3 columns. We had basic, intermediate, advanced for each individual line item. And we said, this isn't to do one-to-one compare John to Jenny, things like that, but we want to help you grow. So for each of these, we're going to put you at step 1. We're going to consider you basic, even though you might be completely advanced somewhere else. We want to use this as a growth mechanism for you to ensure that we're helping you make progress, and for you as a manager to help coach them on some of those. And so I found something like that works really well with setting new goals, and also understanding, to your point of like, what do people thrive in and what do they not enjoy? And I'm like, if they don't enjoy this one aspect, that's fine. They can stay at basic for it, because that's also not part of their future career track. But this is a great conversational point and use case to see progress quarter over quarter, or however often you have these feedback sessions.
It reminds me a lot of weightlifting, because I keep a spreadsheet to see how am I progressing throughout the program, because I keep the same weekly routine for about like 4 to 8 weeks. And that way I can see the progress, because it's so easy to get lost in the day-to-day sauce of like, oh, I'm doing the same exercise all over again. But then like the progress is so tiny every single time that you don't notice it until you have something to compare it to. And so having something like that, like basic, intermediate, and advanced, is going to be super helpful. And then you can actually see the progress over time.
And it helps when they come up to like, hey, I'm ready for a promotion. You can go and reference that and be like, yeah, you're thriving in this, or, let's go a couple more quarters and see if we can bump you up in these couple areas. So it's a good all around. It covers both bases for both individuals.
Oh, for sure. And it's a lot of fun to kind of review that and see the growth and all of that, because ultimately ideally, obviously, the manager cares about the
Yeah.
team members and the direct reports. And so seeing them grow, change, and kind of improve and contribute and see them fulfill their own goals and see that excitement, that is so rewarding in of itself. And so you want to set them up for success as well as yourself, so that you have these like fun moments, because work, we've talked about this so many times, work is such a big chunk of everybody's day-to-day life. And a person's experience at work is going to trickle into their personal life. Yep. And ultimately, you want the support system to be on your side and say, hey, overall, you really love this job. Something is going on. How, like, can you have a conversation with your manager to figure out how to fix this? Lately, you've been in like a grumpy mood or something like that. Or, hey, you're really loving work. Like, that's a lot of fun, and then like the people in your life are like, oh my gosh, you're so excited, you're so high energy, you're like really excited about things. The people in your life, they want to see you succeed. And so having this kind of structure in place is going to help actually make that happen.
And then the last one, and this is, I think, the one that most managers struggle with, is how do you get feedback from the employee? Like, how do you get them to be willing to share things? So would love to hear any tips for how you pose this question or how you create this environment for it to happen.
I mean, we kind of have been sneaking this in throughout the performance review, where we're kind of asking, like, what is your biggest accomplishment? That kind of already shows you what the person really enjoys doing, what some of the like proudest moments were. And that gives you a little bit of insight, along with the areas that they need support in, the areas that they want to grow in, and like what has been holding them back from achieving their goals. That is already giving you a little bit of like insight into the question of like, I would love to hear your feedback on how I can better assist you. What resources do you need from me? And we chatted about this in a previous episode. That was the like welcome interview, where we were talking about, what is your preferred communication style? Do you think these meetings actually make sense? Are they beneficial to you? Do you think it makes sense to just have like a weekly or so recap email or something like that? And so kind of just throwing a couple of different things out, just to say, hey, like, I know that we have these meetings. Are they actually like helpful? Can we change something about the meetings? Do we need the meetings to begin with? Change the cadence. All of these kinds of things do matter. And so you'll start picking up on a couple of hints here and there. And so as a manager, you can always go back and be like, hey, you mentioned that you didn't know this resource was available. And that made me kind of think that there's a little bit of like, there's an area of improvement on my part as a manager where I can communicate these things a little bit better to you. What are some other examples where I could help you? Like what else comes to mind? Like, is there maybe like a resources, like a little like drive or share where all the resources are listed? Would like regular one-on-ones kind of help? What would be helpful? And so that's how you can kind of figure out what else you can do as a manager to improve.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest mistakes managers make, and we've all made it, like you almost have to scrape your own knees learning this lessons, is expecting to get this cut and dry answer when you ask this question of your team members. They're going to tell you exactly what you need to do to improve, how you can better support them. You have to be able to read between the lines, like you were saying, within that conversation to pull that out. And you have to be very self-aware and thinking about, I thought I was helping her accomplish this. I thought I was doing this for him. It's clearly not landing, or they're not sharing things. So you have to be able to recognize that feedback yourself. And that's one of the hardest parts. Like, that's why people management isn't for everyone, and you have to master that skill. So this is something, again, like, there's no silver bullet to getting that answer. Often it's like you said, read between the lines and start to understand it yourself.
For sure. I think Gary Vaynerchuk actually made the best explained management in a way that makes total sense. And he said something along the lines of, a manager's job is to get all the obstacles out of the way for their team so that they can go full force. And if you keep that in mind as like, my job as a manager is to get all the obstacles out of the way so that my team can just crush it every single time. And so your job as a manager for these performance reviews is essentially identifying what are the blocks standing in between your team members' success. Like, what's in there? What can you clear out? That is your number one mission. If that is kind of your manifesto as a manager, then every conversations that you're having, your management style, all of it is going to be about how can I get these obstacles out of the way? And then over time, you will start seeing how to ask these questions, how to gather that information, and how to potentially see signs where maybe the employees and your team members aren't quite aware that there's some kind of block, but you're starting to see it, and you start digging into it and you just move it out of the way, where you just have this like intuitive almost interaction between you and the team.
Yeah, makes it way different. So, all right, I think that pretty much takes it to the end. So any other final points or items before we wrap this one up?
Don't be too serious. And I mean, this is something that we've talked about quite a bit. It's just life is tough enough as it is. These conversations are really tough for people to have. Most people have not had a really good and productive performance review that actually landed in like excitement. It's either you're doing absolutely crappy or you're absolutely killing it. There really is no wholesome in between of like, you've been doing really well. How can we help you kind of like do even better? What are some of your interests? How can we help you expand your interests? You know, because sometimes people realize I don't want to necessarily be in this department, or like I like what I'm doing. I'm also really curious about what this department does, and kind of seeing how can we help this person grow? What are their career goals, and how can I help them get there?
Yeah, I love it. Such a great point to wrap. So Vivien, as always, thank you for coming on the show and sharing this with us. This has been a fun little mini series, and we have one final episode that'll air next week on the internal interview process. But again, I always learn something new every day with these conversations, so hopefully it starts to inspire some of the other recruiters who listen to incorporate these into their day-to-day moving forward. All right, well, as we wrap, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. If you really like this episode, but you're not sure where to go next, we've got a link to a similar one in the show notes, and you can find those in the description of your favorite podcast streaming platform, as well as on our website, loxo.co/podcasts. You ever have questions, you're looking for advice, send it to us, podcast@loxo.co. So, all right, everyone, that's the show. That is yet another amazing Tactical Tuesday with Vivien. Until next time, bye, y'all.